It's Charter California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance, and we are joined by Nancy Nyman Auerbach. She is a professor at Scripps College. Her specialty, at least to me, is fascinating. It deals with food and the politics of food. You know, here we are in California, especially in kind of middle-class suburban areas. We don't realize that there are places, even in our state, where food is just not available in the way we may think it's available.
Right.
Explain that if you can.
Yeah, so food politics people call those food deserts,
Right.
Places where there's an abundance of processed foods, of fast food, but not a lot of availability of fresh produce, grocery stores, the kind of places where you could make a healthy meal.
If you drive through significant portions of South Los Angeles,
Yeah.
you will see what you are describing.
Absolutely.
Bona fide food deserts. I mean, they have every fast food restaurant you can imagine. And yet if you look for a grocery store, it's difficult to find.
Yeah.
How does that happen?
Well, I mean, there's been, I think it's a combination of corporate policy and government policy, right? There's been a systematic disinvestment from our inner cities, and, you know, grocery stores have been pulling out as they think it's not profitable.
But I mean, look, I understand that maybe some of the, quote, higher end grocery stores
Yeah.
may not want to have businesses in socioeconomically disadvantaged areas, regardless of race or
Right.
color or whatever it may be. But just general mainstream markets, people need to buy food. Why wouldn't they be everywhere?
Yeah, you would think, right? But, you know, if you're making a decision about where to put a store, part of it has to do with, you know, what is the perceived safety of that neighborhood? What is the, you know, they do analyses on what the average income level is in order to know, you know, how much they're going to pull in. So, I mean, part of it is, you know, to what extent can we control that outcome? I think that is a sign of a deeper problem, right? And the deeper problem is that, you know, fast food is significantly cheaper than fresh produce, and it's significantly cheaper. It's not an accident, right? I mean, government policy, the subsidization of corn and soy, you know, through the Farm Bill actually makes that food cheaper. It's not natural that it's cheaper, and the lobbying power of those corporations is huge. So you've got a combination of political and economic power, which is why I teach political economy, which is why food is a natural lens to look at those kinds of power differentials.
Recently, we heard of a controversy brewing in New York City. And I think it's really a great kind of case study
Yeah.
when you look at food and food politics. And that dealt with, I mean, I hope it's okay I use this term, the big gulp.
Yeah,
The big gulp.
the soda ban.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which I admit, I enjoy the big gulp sometimes.
Sure.
But talk to us about the controversy surrounding the big gulp.
Yeah, I mean, I think it gets to one of the core issues I like to talk about in my classes, which is, you know, in this country, often political debates center around this issue of choice and freedom
Right.
on the one hand, and that has been a massive, you know, there's been a massive attack on, you know, you can't tell us what to, you know, it's paternalistic, the government should get out of our decision making.
1984.
Yeah, but on the other hand, I think those of us who are really concerned about these sort of food justice inequities start from the position that we think we're free, but we're already not, right? The fact is that when corporations have the amount of power to change the relative costs of food, to have advertising, to get our kids hooked from the time that they're 3 years old, to get sodas in schools, to right, all of those things that we're already not free individuals, right? And so some of that issue, I like to sort of change the nature of that question of should the government decide or should we decide? That's not really the question. The question is, should we look at some of the underlying power dynamics?
In New York, the big gulp was banned, but the ban was overturned.
Yes, it was.
What did you make of that? I mean, no, you're not a lawyer.
Yeah.
But you know, talk to us about that.
So this is my take on it. I was actually asked, you know, was this a huge disappointment for the food justice movement? Was it a failure? And I actually don't think so, because I don't actually think the point was to get the ban.
Right.
I actually think that by bringing so much attention to this issue, right, that's part of it, is to make people see what's going on. And also it changes the relative cost benefit analysis for corporations, right? If it's worth it for them to externalize their costs onto the health of folks, right, especially low-income people of color, then they will continue to do it. But the more light that is shined on this, the less corporations are actually willing to go there. So I actually think, same thing with the GMO debate in this state. It lost.
Modified, right.
Yeah, genetically modified foods, right? The labeling, there was a move to try to get labeling on, all genetically modified foods. That failed, but I actually don't think that was a failure. I think it made corporations spend so much money fighting that proposal.
But let me ask you, I don't know if this is an area you've explored, but I would think that in some cases GMOs are a net positive. Am I wrong, especially when you think about food justice?
So, yeah, I mean, this is a major debate, right, between the scientists who say, no, you shouldn't be Luddites. There's a way in which technology can work for us. I'm a political economist, right? So my issue is not, I don't even pretend to know whether or not it's safe in all areas, where it's safe, where it's not. But I do know the political economy of this question, right? And large corporations like Monsanto are able to use the technology in ways that really are, I think, fundamentally problematic for our democracy, right? So the ways in which, first of all, to be able to say we shouldn't even have these foods labeled and to be able to win there, right? To be able, it encourages monocultures all over the world.
When you say monocultures, meaning?
So the planting of a single crop where there used to be diverse crops. And there, scientists are very clear on the negative aspects of that, right? Because it brings new pests. It brings pests that are resistant to the kind. It encourages the use of more pesticides. So, there are ways in which there's an economics of the use of genetically modified organisms that makes it so that it's not necessarily whether the genetic modification is a problem or not, but it does allow for further monopolization to go on, and that kind of political and economic concentration of power is a problem.
What about with our friends to the south in Mexico, when you think about food justice?
Yeah.
I mean, I know you've looked into this issue generally. What can you tell us about how that issue plays out to the south? Okay,
so this is probably the key example of interconnectedness in political economy of food. So NAFTA gets passed and opens
North America Free Trade Agreement.
Exactly, and it opens up the border for U.S. farmers to be able to sell corn, especially corn, in Mexico, right? And Mexican farmers get systematically put out of business. And you might think, well, that's because we're just more efficient, right? But the fact is, NAFTA was passed requiring the Mexican government to stop subsidizing the Mexican ejidos, the cooperative farms, but it did not require any change in the Farm Bill in the U.S. So what you have is U.S. subsidized corn competing with unsubsidized Mexican corn. All of those farmers in southern Mexico start to lose their livelihood. That's when we get a big immigration wave, right? And then all of a sudden we have an immigration crisis, right? So, and that immigration crisis now creates a bunch of people in vulnerable conditions that are having to work, with pesticides, with all kinds of.
Happen? That we didn't have to lift our protective barriers and they did, or whatever. Politics.
We have relatively more power than Mexico, right? We're negotiating a trade agreement. The size of the U.S. market gives us a tremendous amount of power.
Her name is Nancy Nyman Auerbach. She is a professor at Scripps College in food politics, food economy. My name is Brad Pomerance, and this is Charter California Edition.